she had no horse. That was the first thing Harlan Briggs noticed from the porch of the Double Fork Ranch. Not the woman herself, not the bundle she carried over one shoulder, not even the fact that a woman was walking the road at all in weather like this. It was the absence of a horse that told him everything he needed to know about how far she had come and how little she had left. He watched her from the rocker without moving. The coffee in his hands had gone cold. Across the yard, the windmill turned slow and indifferent above the water trough, and somewhere behind the barn his remaining cattle were making the low, restless sound they made when the temperature dropped faster than expected. The woman stopped at the gate. She didn't call out. She didn't rattle the latch or wave her arm. She simply stood there, holding the gatepost with one hand, and looked toward the house, the way a person looks at something they aren't sure they have the right to want. Harlan set the coffee down on the porch rail. His wife, Ruth, appeared in the doorway behind him. 34 years of marriage had made certain things unnecessary to say aloud, and so neither of them spoke. Ruth dried her hands on her apron and stood beside him, and together they looked at the woman at the gate. She was young. That was the second thing. Young and road-worn in the particular way that has nothing to do with age and everything to do with the kind of miles that grind something out of a person and leave them quieter than they were before. "She's hurt," Ruth said. She wasn't, as it turned out. The way she favored her left side had more to do with the weight of the bundle than any injury, though the boots she wore were not made for the distance she appeared to have traveled in them. Harlan came down off the porch. He was 61 years old and moved like it, but he moved steadily, and when he reached the gate, he opened it without ceremony and looked at the woman the way a man looks at something that requires an honest assessment. "You lost?" he said. "No, sir," she said. "I know right where I am." Her name was Clara Voss. She told them that much before Harlan had the gate fully open, as though she understood that strangers who offer their names first are less frightening than strangers who make you ask. She was 23 years old, or said she was. She had come from Belden, which was 11 miles east, though she did not explain why she had walked instead of ridden or why she had left Belden at all. What she said, standing at the gate of the Double Fork in the last gray hour before sundown, was this: "I can work. Whatever needs doing. I'm not particular about the work, and I won't take up more space than I need. Let me stay, and I'll earn it." Harlan looked at her for a long moment. Behind him, he heard Ruth take one slow step down off the porch. "We're not running a boarding house," he said. "I know that," Clara said. "I'm not asking for boarding. I'm asking for work." There was a difference, and the way she said it made clear that she understood the difference and meant it precisely. Harlan looked back at Ruth. Ruth was looking at the girl the way she had looked at certain things over the years. The three-legged dog they'd kept for 9 years. The orphaned calf that nobody believed would make it, with the particular expression that meant she had already decided something and was simply waiting for Harlan to catch up. He turned back to Clara Voss. "It's fixing to get cold tonight," he said. "Yes, sir," she said. "It is." He stepped back from the gate. Ruth gave her the room at the back of the house, the one with the window that faced the south pasture. It had belonged to their son, Thomas, before the fever took him in the winter of 1871, at the age of 22. Nobody had said so that first night, and Clara had not asked about the shirt still hanging on the back of the door or the worn Bible on the bedside shelf, but she had been careful with both of them, and Ruth noticed. That first morning, Clara was up before the sun. Harlan found her in the barn already working, pitching old hay out of the stalls with the methodical patience of someone who had done exactly this kind of work before and had no need to be shown. The milk cow, Bess, who had a long-standing opinion about strangers in her space, was standing at the far end of her stall in a state of relative calm that Harlan could not immediately account for. "She bite you?" he said. "Tried to," Clara said, without stopping work. "We came to an understanding." He watched her for a moment. She had tied her hair back with a strip of cloth, and her sleeves were rolled to the elbow, and she moved with the kind of economy that means a person has learned not to waste what they have, including effort. "You know cattle?" he said. "Some," she said. "My father ran a small herd in Missouri before he sold them off. I know enough to be useful and enough to know when to ask." "What happened to the herd?" She stopped for a moment, just a breath's worth of pause, and then kept working. "He got sick," she said. "Things went in a direction after that. Harlan understood that some answers are a door left open, just enough to let light in without inviting you through, and he did not press further. He handed her the other pitchfork from the wall. The double fork had once run 300 head of cattle across 4 sections of good Montana grass. That was before the winter of 1872, which had taken cattle and savings in equal measure, and before the trouble with the Aldrich brothers the following spring, which had taken what the winter left. Now Harlan ran 62 head on 2 sections, and the fencing on the east side had been failing since September, and the well on the north pasture had given up in October, and the list of things that needed doing had grown longer each week, while the number of hands available to do them had stayed stubbornly at 2. He was not a man who admitted difficulty easily, but he was honest enough, in the private accounting he did each evening on the porch with his cold coffee, to know that 2 people his age could not hold this ranch together through another hard winter without help. He had not expected the help to arrive on foot, through his front gate, in the form of a young woman from Belden, who would not say what she was leaving behind. But he had learned a long time ago that the land did not care about his expectations. Clara worked without complaint and without the need for constant direction, which Harlan came to understand was rarer than it should have been. She mended the section of east fence that had been down since before the first frost, working in cold that made the wire stiff and uncooperative, wearing gloves that were not quite adequate and not mentioning it. She hauled water to the north pasture on mornings when the pump on the main well needed priming, a task that required 3 trips with the heavy yoke across ground that had gone iron hard with cold. She was good with the cattle in the quiet, steady way that animals seem to recognize as genuine. She did not rush them or shout at them, and when one of the younger steers got itself tangled in a length of old wire near the creek bed, she sat down in the frozen grass beside it and worked the wire loose by hand over the course of 40 minutes rather than risk injuring the animal by forcing it. Ruth watched all of this from a careful distance for the first 2 weeks. Ruth Briggs was not a suspicious woman by nature, but she was a careful one, and careful was a thing she had become out of necessity after the trouble with the Aldrich brothers, who had worked for the Double Fork for a season before it became clear that their interest in the ranch was not limited to the wages Harlan paid them. She had learned to observe before she trusted, and she observed Clara Voss the way she observed weather, not with hostility, but with the patient attention of someone who has lived long enough to know that conditions can change. What she observed was this: the girl worked harder than she was asked to. She ate what she was given and thanked them for it without performance. She asked about Thomas only once, quietly, after she noticed the photograph on the mantel, not intrusively, just a single question, and when Ruth answered, she listened without trying to fill the silence that came after. And she fixed the stove. The kitchen stove had been drawing poorly for 2 seasons, filling the room with smoke on cold mornings and making the baking unpredictable. Ruth had mentioned it to Harlan 3 times. Harlan had looked at it twice and declared it beyond his particular competence. Clara had disappeared behind it one afternoon with a length of wire and a rag and some patience, and by supper time, it drew clean. "Where did you learn that?" Ruth asked. "My father couldn't afford a repairman," Clara said simply. Ruth put a second piece of cornbread on Clara's plate without being asked. It was the 3rd week of November when the trouble came. It came in the form of 2 men named Decker and Purcell, who rode onto the Double Fork in the early afternoon while Harlan was out checking the south pasture and Clara was splitting wood in the yard. They were not men Harlan knew well, but he knew their names in the way that ranchers come to know the names of men who work for Silas Greer, which was a name that had a particular weight in that part of Montana. Silas Greer owned a ranch directly east of the Double Fork. He had owned it for 6 years, and in those 6 years, the Double Fork's eastern boundary had been a source of ongoing discussion. A word that in this context meant dispute, and in some months meant something closer to threat. Decker was the larger of the 2. He had a way of occupying space that was meant to suggest that the space already belonged to him. Purcell said less but watched more, which Clara recognized as the more dangerous habit. She set down the axe and waited. "We're looking for Briggs," Decker said. "He did not get down from his horse." "He's out on the pasture," Clara said. "Is there something I can help you with?" Decker looked at her for a moment, with the particular expression of a man who is deciding whether a woman in a work apron, holding an axe handle, constitutes an obstacle worth considering. "Mr. Greer's been reviewing the survey lines on the east section," he said. "He has some concerns about the placement of the new fence." "The fence is on Briggs' land," Clara said. "The survey pins are still in the ground. Anyone who wants to look at them is welcome to." Decker smiled, which was not an improvement on his expression. "Mr. Greer has his own surveyor," he said. "Might be those pins aren't where they used to be." There was a long pause. A crow landed on the fence post behind the two men and then thought better of it and left. "I'll let Mr. Briggs know you came by," Clara said. "He'll want to hear that Mr. Greer has concerns." She said, "The word concerns the way you set something fragile down very carefully on a hard surface." Decker held her gaze for a moment. Then he turned his horse without another word, and Purcell followed. And Clara watched them ride back out through the gate before she picked up the axe again and went back to work. She split wood for another hour before Harlan came back from the pasture, and when she told him what had happened, she told it plain and complete, without embellishment or alarm. He listened with his arms crossed, and his jaw set in the particular way that meant he was containing something he didn't want to say in front of a woman. "You should have come to get me," he said. "By the time I found you, they'd have done what they came to do," she said, which was, look the place over and see who was here. "Now they know." Harlan looked at her. "Now they know what?" he said. "That someone was watching," she said. He told Ruth that evening. Ruth listened, and then she was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Harlan, we need to talk about Clara." He waited. "Not about sending her away," Ruth said quickly, reading whatever was on his face. "About whether she knows what she's walking into. Because if Greer comes back with a paper from some bought surveyor, it's not going to be our problem alone anymore. It'll be hers too, if she's still here." Harlan sat with that. The next morning, he found Clara before breakfast, in the barn with the milk cow, and he told her straight. He told her about the Aldrich brothers, and about the trouble they'd caused, and about the fact that what remained of that trouble had taken a new shape with a new name, which was Silas Greer. He told her the ranch was in debt, not badly, but genuinely, and that a sustained legal fight over the east section boundary would cost more than they had. He told her that staying on the double fork for the winter might mean being present for something that didn't resolve cleanly. Clara listened to all of it with the unhurried attention she gave to things that mattered. When he was done, she said, "Do you want me to leave?" "No," Harlan said, which surprised him slightly as he said it. "I'm asking if you understand what staying means." She looked at him with the clear, level gaze that Ruth had noticed in the first week, the gaze of someone who has made peace with uncertainty and is no longer frightened by the shape of it. "Mr. Briggs," she said, "I understand that this land deserves someone who'll fight for it. I'm not finished here." Harlan looked at the barn floor for a moment. Then he nodded once and walked back to the house. December came in hard. The snow arrived before the temperature did, which meant it fell heavy and wet and settled deep, and by the second week of the month, the south pasture was under 1.5 feet that showed no particular interest in leaving. The cattle bunched near the windbreak, and feeding them required breaking through drifts that rebuilt themselves overnight with a kind of patient malice. Clara worked through it. She did not complain about the cold, which was the kind of cold that makes your hands stop being hands and start being something closer to clubs. And she did not complain about the hours, which started before the sky was light and ended after it was dark again. She simply worked, and when Ruth brought coffee out to the barn at mid-morning, Clara drank it standing up and handed back the cup and went back to the cattle. Ruth started coming out at mid-morning to bring the coffee even on days when she had not planned to. They talked, on those mornings, in the brief window between the coffee arriving and the cold, reminding them both that standing still was not a good idea. They talked about small things at first, the stove, the cattle, the state of the south fence, which was holding but only barely, and then gradually about larger ones. Ruth learned that Clara's father had died in the spring, a man named August Voss, who had farmed a piece of ground near Belden for 20 years and left behind more character than property. She learned that there had been no one else in Belden to stay for after August was gone, or rather, and this was something Ruth heard in the careful way Clara did not say it, there had been someone, once, but that was a road that had closed. and Clara had not gone into grief about it. She had simply packed a bundle and started walking, which was, Ruth thought, either the healthiest or the saddest thing she had heard in some time, and possibly both. She did not ask about the letter. She had seen Clara writing it, one evening after supper, at the kitchen table with the lamp pulled close. A long letter, written in the careful hand of someone for whom writing does not come easily, but who takes the difficulty seriously. Clara had folded it and put it in her coat pocket, and nothing more had been said about it. Ruth did not ask, but she noticed. Silas Greer's surveyor arrived on the 14th of December with 2 witnesses and a document that claimed the eastern boundary of the Double Fork sat 40 yards west of where Harlan's survey pins said it did. 40 yards did not sound like much. 40 yards across a half-mile of fence line, however, was enough ground to contain a water source, specifically the branch of Aldridge Creek that the cattle depended on through the dry months, and that was not an accident. Harlan stood in the yard and read the document in the wind, and his face was the face of a man holding something that cost more than it appeared to. Clara stood beside him and read it too. She said, "When did Harlan's survey get done?" "Spring of '76, Harlan said, "by a man named Fowler out of Helena." "Is Fowler still working?" "Far as I know." "Then write him tonight," she said. "Registered letter. Tell him you need a sworn statement confirming the original pins and the measurements he recorded. If Greer's surveyor is working from a new document, Fowler's original records will show the discrepancy, and a discrepancy produced 6 years after the original survey is a story a judge is going to want explained." Harlan looked at her. "Where did you learn that?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "My father had a boundary dispute," she said. "He lost it. He lost it because he didn't know to do exactly that." She looked at the document in Harlan's hand, and the look on her face was not bitterness exactly, but it was something in the neighborhood of it, the particular expression of a person who has paid for a lesson once and intends to make the payment worth something. "Write the letter tonight," she said again, "and write to the land office in Helena as well. Let them know a resurvey has been submitted. Make it official that you're contesting it. That changes what Greer can do while the dispute is open." Harlan was still looking at her. "You're sure about this?" he said. "No," she said, "but I'm sure that doing nothing is worse." That night he wrote both letters. Ruth sealed them, and Clara walked them to the post herself the next morning, 4 miles in the snow, before the sun was properly up. The response from Fowler came 10 days before Christmas, and it was better than they had hoped. Not only did Fowler have his original measurements on file, he had noted in his records a conversation with the previous owner of the Greer parcel, in which the eastern boundary had been verbally confirmed and described in detail that aligned precisely with the Double Forks pins. His sworn statement arrived 3 days after his first letter, and with it, a note that said he had dealt with Greer's surveyor before, and that the man's recent work had a way of bending toward whoever was paying him. The land office in Helena opened a formal review. Silas Greer did not come to the Double Fork himself after that. Decker and Purcell came one more time, in the first week of January, and found Clara splitting wood again in the yard, and whatever they saw in her face, or in the way she stood, or in the simple fact that she was still there, still working, still watching, still present, made Decker turn his horse without a word, and they did not come back. The formal review took until February. The boundary stayed where Harlan's pins said it was. It was Ruth who asked, on a Sunday morning in the middle of February, when the light was just beginning to come back into the sky the way it does after a hard winter, with the particular quality of something that has survived something and knows it. "Are you planning to stay on past spring?" Clara was washing up the breakfast dishes. She did not stop washing. "If you'll have me," she said. Ruth looked at Harlan, who was sitting at the kitchen table with his coffee and the particular expression of a man who has something to say and is arranging it. "The east section needs a proper hand all spring," he said. "And the well on the north pasture still needs work, and the calving's going to be heavier this year than last." He paused. "I'm not saying forever. I'm saying there's work, and you do it well, and we'd be glad to keep working out the terms, if you're willing." Clara put the last dish on the rack and dried her hands on the towel and turned around. "I'm willing," she said. Ruth poured her more coffee, which was its own language entirely. In March, when the first melt came and the south pasture began showing the faint green suggestion of grass underneath the last of the snow, and the cattle moved out of the windbreak for the first time in weeks, with the particular deliberate contentment of animals that have decided to believe in spring. Clara wrote another letter. She sat at the kitchen table after supper, with the lamp close, and she wrote for a long time. Ruth was mending by the fire. Harlan had gone to bed early, which he did on evenings when the cold had gotten into his hip. The house was quiet, in the good way, the way that is not empty but full of the sounds of living, the fire settling, the cattle moving outside, the small creak of the house, holding itself together against the last of the winter. When Clara finished the letter, she folded it and held it in both hands for a moment. "Ruth," she said. Ruth looked up from her mending. "I have a sister," Clara said, "in Belden. She's 16 and living with our aunt, who is not a difficult woman, but is not a warm one either." She looked down at the letter. "I've been writing to her since I got here. I told her about the place, about the work, about you and Harlan." She paused. "I told her there might be room if she wanted to come in the spring. If that's, I should have asked first. I know that." Ruth set her mending down in her lap. She looked at Clara for a long moment. The fire settled in the grate. Outside, one of the cattle made the low, soft sound they make when nothing is wrong. "What's her name?" Ruth said. Clara looked up. "Nora," she said. Ruth nodded slowly. "Nora," she repeated, as though she was measuring the name for something. "She's a hard worker," Clara said. "Harder than me, actually. She's better with the—" "Clara," Ruth said quietly. Clara stopped. "Write her," Ruth said. "Tell her to come in April, when the road is passable. Tell her we'll have the room ready." Clara looked at her for a moment, with the expression of someone who has been braced for one answer for long enough that a different answer requires a moment to become real. "Thank you," she said. It came out lower than she intended. Ruth picked her mending back up. "Thank you," she said in return, without looking up, "for staying." Clara Voss arrived on the 12th of April on the back of a wagon driven by a man from Belden who was heading west anyway and had agreed to take her as far as the Double Fork turnoff. She was 16, with the same clear gaze as her sister, and twice the energy, and an opinion about nearly everything that she offered with the cheerful directness of a person who has not yet learned that other people find this alarming. Harlan decided he liked her within about 20 minutes, which was close to a record for him. She was settled into the room beside Clara's by that evening, and had already identified 3 things in the barn that she believed could be improved, and had communicated this to Harlan in a tone that suggested she was doing him a favor by pointing it out, which, he privately allowed, she was. That night, after supper, after Nora had been talked down from reorganizing the tack room until morning, after Harlan had gone to sit on the porch with his coffee and the slow, private accounting he did each evening of what the day had cost and what it had returned, Clara came to stand beside Ruth at the kitchen window. Outside, the south pasture was dark and wide under the spring stars. The cattle were dim shapes at the fence line. The windmill turned slow and steady in the night air. And somewhere near the barn, Harlan's old dog, Pepper, was making his final round of the property before sleep. "It's something," Clara said quietly, looking out. Ruth knew what she meant. Not the view, exactly, though the view was fine. The something she meant was larger than that, and smaller too, the particular feeling of a place where the people in it are accounted for, where there is enough work for the hands present and enough warmth for the cold coming, and where the life being lived is honest and belongs to the people living it. "Yes," Ruth said. She did not feel the need to say more than that. Clara stayed at the window a moment longer. Then she turned and began clearing the supper dishes, and Ruth joined her, and the kitchen was full of the sound of ordinary life going on, which is, if you are paying attention, one of the finest sounds there is. In the morning, there would be fences to check, and cattle to move, and the north well to attend to, and a dozen other things that needed doing, and would get done, because there were now hands enough to do them, and because the Double Fork in the spring of 1879 was, against certain odds, and through a particular combination of stubbornness and grace, still standing. Somewhere to stop, Edna had once. No. Somewhere to stop, Ruth thought, watching the light above the south pasture. It changes a person. Not the stopping itself, but the understanding, which comes slower, that the place you stopped was waiting for you, that the land knew something you didn't. That belonging is not a thing you find already made, like a coin in the road, but something you build in the working of it, in the cold mornings, and the difficult wire, and the letters written by lamplight, and the coffee handed over without a word because none is needed. Clara Voss had arrived at the Double Fork with nothing but an offer and a pair of boots that weren't made for the road she'd traveled. She left nothing behind. Sometimes the most important thing a person can offer isn't money or credentials or a long history of good standing. It's simply showing up and doing the work in front of them, honestly and without complaint. Clara didn't ask to be trusted. She earned it, one cold morning at a time. And in doing so, she didn't just save a ranch, she built a family. That's something any of us can do, wherever we happen to stop. A small note for you. This story was created and fictionalized by AI, crafted for your entertainment, and in the hope of leaving something warm and useful behind, a little reminder that showing up, in whatever form that takes, is always enough to begin.